at stake. And we will also ask our dear friends in the South and Central American context to also provide us with a paper. So let's hope that in perhaps a maximum 1 year's time, we sit here together to discuss even more perspectives. So having said that, again, thank you very much, especially to those who have written the papers, very relevant papers, extremely well noticed amongst South Asian countries. Thank you for the European perspective, and I am looking forward to extremely insightful and vivid discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Carsten Klein, for giving an overview of these two papers, and also that how important it is that two regions, that collaboration and learning from each other. Now, I would like to request Michael Koch to come here and give us some opening remarks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Klein. I appreciate a lot that Friedrich Naumann Foundation has committed to focus on LGBT human rights worldwide, but especially in the South Asian region. I think this is really a great example for the work of Friedrich Naumann Foundation in the region. Thank you very much for that from my side. So I'm both the spokesperson of FDP on LGBTI in the European Parliament, and I'm also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And especially in the Foreign Affairs Committee, we are facing challenges at the moment. You just named the sub-Saharan region. I think besides some countries on the Arab Peninsula, this is at the moment the region where we see most deterioration of the situation of LGBTI. We also have good examples in the sub-Saharan region, like Botswana, for example, who made great progress. But we see the example of Burundi, where the president said in a public speech that they should bring the gays into the stadium and stone them, and that would not be a sin. We see the example of Uganda, where the legal penalties have been increased for lifelong imprisonment, and in certain cases also for death penalty. And we now see the example of Ghana, a democracy that we often see as a model, where now freedom of speech, for example, to discuss on LGBT rights, also in a political context, is penalized. Not only the homosexual intercourse as such, but even more penalized talking positively about LGBTI, about their rights, about their living. And this is a matter that is not only a question of LGBT human rights, but it questions the standards of democracy in a country like Ghana. I have been, as I was a student, I was working in Ghana for some months, and in the building aside there was the opposition newspaper, and they didn't get paper because the military dictatorship didn't want them to spread their ideas. I never thought that Ghana would come to a situation where under other headlines suddenly the freedom of speech and democratic principles are hampered in this way. And the European Union has to decide if it wants to keep that as given, or if we politically interfere on behalf of human rights. I see that there are, of course, other interests in the foreign policy, but the European Union has the more for more principle in the foreign policy. So those countries that are sharing our values have a closer relationship, get more cooperation than those who do not share our values. And this should also be applied to LGBT human rights situation. I think in South Asia, I'm not an expert for that, you're much more an expert on that, and I'm very curious to hear about. We see at least some progress, where in other regions we really see a deterioration. And the question is if the European Union, on the one hand, can support LGBT activists, can support a positive public opinion in different regions of the world. That's a matter of the also financial support, public support by embassies. And on the other hand, if we have also to at least have an answer when it comes to development cooperation for those countries that deteriorate the situation. So when we come to the inside of the European Union, as it said in your study, compared to other regions of the world, the situation in Europe is quite good overall. But of course, even in Europe, we see countries where we have problems concerning safety of gay rights, about open communication in education, in youth work. We have still significant restrictions in different countries of the European Union on trans rights, on egg cell plantation and surrogacy, so on reproductive rights. We have deterioration on the situation on rainbow families in Italy. And we have positive examples. One of the positive examples, luckily now, is the German government that is really dedicated to progress on the LGBTI rights situation. So the German government, especially also the Liberal Minister of Justice, has made a reform on hate crimes. So not only racist motivation, but also anti-gender and anti-LGBT motivations increase the penalties in criminal cases. We have this week, we will hopefully pass a law in the German parliament to improve self-determination of trans people. We have done different things, for example, the stop of discrimination of gay and bisexual men on blood donations. And the next on the agenda for the Justice Minister is a new law, a new family law that reflects the needs of rainbow families in regard, for example, to parental agreements between the mothers and the fathers in rainbow families to ensure that there are no conflicts that in the end hamper the children. So that's on the way. In Europe, we will see what will happen with the next parliament and with the next commission. The European elections are of relevance also for LGBTI issues because we had good progress on the European Union level in regard to the strategy of the European Commission. But the question is, will there be such strategy for the next period again? Will that be ambitious? And will that include a serious interaction with the member states? Because a lot of the questions that are relevant for LGBTI are not in the competence of the European Union, but it's in the competence of the national governments. Criminal law, family law, these things are of national competence. But still, there is something that has to be done on European level. For example, when it comes to rainbow families and their recognition. Our view as liberals is that any marriage, any parenthood that is recognized in one European country has to be recognized in all European countries. And that has to be done on the level of the Council. And that is a challenge. The Parliament is on the right side, but the Council has to agree on these laws so that they really become a progress in Europe. So I'm very interested in getting to know more about your views on the European studies, especially on some of the member states, but also especially, because I'm not so familiar with that, on the situation in South Asia. And once again, thanks a lot to Friedrich Naumann Foundation to make that possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Koch, for giving us an insight. As for the structure of the event, we have next we will have the presentation of the two papers. Here you can find on the left, you can download. Oh, it's gone. You can download the South Asian paper, and on the right you can download the European paper. Now I would like to request Rohan Joshi to represent his paper.
Oh, thank you.
Very good evening to all of us present here. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. I have a bunch of thanks to make right at the start of the speech, but I'm also aware that this is being live streamed, am I right?
Yeah.
So for the people who have joined us from South Asia, from different countries, namaskar, and it's a holy month of Ramadan, so assalamu alaikum to all of us who have joined us in South Asia. This is a great opportunity to stand here and represent the diverse South Asian queer community. It's a huge responsibility to be here as a representative for a community which is very diverse as the culture of South Asia. So it's an honor, but at the same time a huge responsibility, and I hope to make justice in the next 5 to 10 minutes of time when I present my work. First and foremost, thank you so much, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and especially Dr. Carlson Klein, Regional Director of Friedrich Naumann Foundation, FTP of course, for supporting this work and having belief that this work is relevant, not just for the community, but for upholding individual dignity and democracy, not just in the region, but in the world, because we hold 1/4 of the world's population. So what we do here holds potential to show path for the remaining 75% of the population in terms of individual freedom, dignity, and democracy. It's really important work. I cannot thank FNF enough for initiating this. Mr. Kauf, thank you so much for joining us. It's really important for political participation in these events, not just as a symbolism, but showing that these are policy issues and these matter, and same extends to Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Dolawate, who has joined from Sri Lanka. He is one of the 3 parliamentarians in the entire region who have initiated private member bills to decriminalize homosexuality. His contribution is immense. He's a humble person, but his contribution is really immense in this regard. I'm also really thankful to the community, European community, who has joined here. There was definitely many other better things you could do this evening, but you have joined us here, and it also shows that the commitment, not just for your own region, but for South Asia, and this support really matters a lot to us. My friend Inaya will definitely agree. It's not just the refuge for us, but it's also the much required support when we don't find that voice of support within the region quite often. And last but not the least, I think many of us from the community stand here and get the recognition and accolades, but those who do not get recognition are our families and our friends who also fight these battles every day, convincing others that these are actually natural things and these are things just as any other thing. And thanks so much for those friends, supporters, and family members for having this belief and standing by us in whichever capacity they have. With this long but very important note of thanks, let me come to the paper on status of LGBTQI individuals in South Asia. We have indeed covered a very long distance when it comes to recognition of LGBTQI individuals, visibility of LGBTQI individuals in the last few years' time, and also to a great extent legal recognition of the LGBTQI individuals. Yes, at the same time, it's true that the community, particularly in countries where we have slightly more religiously conservative governments historically, the society, of course, as you know, has always been a little bit more on the orthodox side or on the conservative side. So these issues have never been seen as the issues that exist in our region, but as an imposition of some Western ideas. So we have fought that battle for a long time, but we have in the last 20 years particularly covered a great distance across all the 7 to 8 countries in South Asia in terms of legal recognition, which is what I talk about in my paper. I'll go a little bit into quick sort of details of some of those, but I must say that we also feel that we have covered a long distance, but we haven't come this far to come only this far. We want to cover a lot more distance, and that's also what we talk about in the paper. I think first and the foremost is we have seen a great improvement in recognition of transgender rights in South Asia. Out of 8 countries that I have seen, 6 out of those have done some or the other progress in recognizing the rights of transgender individuals. It could be legislation passed by countries like Pakistan, India. We also, of course, have Supreme Court judgment in Nepal. We have recognition of transgender rights in Bangladesh. Sri Lanka has started making some movement in that direction. Bhutan has, of course, made some movement in that direction. So particularly when it comes to transgender rights, we have seen a big sort of improvement in the last 20 years' time. There is also a reason I won't go into the depth of it, which will also encourage you to download the paper, because the transgender identity is distinct in South Asia. It's a cultural identity. We have had transgender, the distinct third gender, for a very long time. We have different words for it, such as hijra, kinnar, khajasara in Pakistan, which actually describe this community and their third gender, and it also has religious connotations in Hindu religion, of course, and Muslim Islamic religion as well. So that's perhaps one of the reasons why the transgender rights have received a little bit more traction over the last few years' time. When it comes to homosexuality, particularly the sex between 2 consenting adults, male or women, for the longest time, as I said, it was seen as a Western concept, although it's not true, because in our Hindu mythology, we actually have references and a lot of sort of cultural, symbols, which indicate that it has been around for a long, long time. But somewhere in the 19th century, the colonial sort of legacy that we have has changed that a lot. We did not have any law or anything prohibiting homosexual activity between consenting adults. And the British rule actually changed it, at least in 4 out of the 8 countries, which is of course Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka as well. And to an extent, I would say in Nepal and Bangladesh as well, we have seen that the penal code actually brought in the whole criminalization of same-sex activity between consenting adults. So a lot of time has gone in the last few years' time to actually do away with the colonial legacy. And that's really been the fight when it comes to homosexual rights in South Asia. That said, I think Nepal right now is the only country where the Supreme Court has directed the government to sort of decriminalize homosexuality, of course, but also recognize the same-sex relationships. When it comes to countries like India, we have partially sort of repealed Section 377. In case of Sri Lanka, it's the Ceylon Act and Section 365. Similarly, we have different sections, but the origin for that is the same, which is essentially the colonial legislation. And that's not been changed significantly. I must say, and also thank the judiciary in the region, which has been actually the most important sort of player, which has upheld the rights across the region. The governments have not been that forthcoming, but the Supreme Courts, in most cases, have given directions to the government to pass the legislation. The governments, of course, have not been that proactive, especially when it comes to countries like India and Pakistan. To a great extent, they are also opposed to passing any legislation in recognition of same-sex relationships, and that reality, unfortunately, hasn't changed as much. We, of course, have some rays of hope, such as in Bhutan, where the parliament discussed the need for having more comprehensive recognition of LGBTQI community. Same in Sri Lanka, I think we have high hopes that the parliament goes for third discussion, which is due very soon, in terms of recognition of LGBTQI individuals. I cannot unfortunately say the same about, let's say, Bangladesh, and let's not even sort of get into Afghanistan and Maldives, where the active threat to life to LGBTQI individuals is really there. And since the resurgence of more religiously fundamentalist extremist groups, such as, of course, Taliban in case of Afghanistan and in case of Maldives once again, which picks up certain sections of the Sharia law. Sharia does not actually have any provision for death penalty of LGBTQIA individuals. It's the interpretation of Sharia which talks about a death penalty, but that's the interpretation that these two countries are going with, and hence that there is active threat to life when it comes to LGBTQIA individuals in Afghanistan and Maldives. And we cannot imagine how that situation would be, but our friends from Afghanistan and Maldives actually report that since the resurgence of these governments, it's not been that if you notice, they will go after you. They will go after you and make notice you. That's really the reality right now, and that's really concerning when it comes to the region. As far as I think some of the big changes, one is the visibility, as I mentioned. In the region, if you see the media currently, for the longest time, we were basically part of the jokes that the movies, the sort of TV series make. We were part of the caricature to attract a sure shot laughter when you include. From there, now more significant stories of LGBTQ individuals are shown on platforms like Netflix. These stories are homegrown, these stories are from India, these stories are from Pakistan, and these stories are also receiving a lot of viewership and acceptance, which is a very, very positive sign, of course. But at the same time, if you go by research by some credible agencies like the Pew Research, which conducted a research in 2019 in India, still about 65% people believe that homosexuality should not be accepted in the society. So there is still a large public opinion which remains against particularly homosexuality and which is concerning. It's a mixed picture when it comes to these issues in the entire region, but even if you take one country at a time, you will not have one comprehensive, cohesive picture anywhere. At the same time though, I think the collective feeling is that we have certainly gone a couple of steps forward than backward in the last 10 to 15 years' time. The absolute sort of, how do we say, the physical violence as well as the non-physical violence in the form of threats, in the form of trolling, hatred, there is certain reduction in those over the last few years' time. There's also a feeling that you can't just get away by going after queer individuals in the region, which is, of course, I mean, I think in the given context, it's a great sign, and we would love to see more of that happening. To that extent, a big ecosystem of change, which is required for any such changes to happen, and I do not believe that LGBTQI is the only issue in the world. There are so many marginalized communities, there are so many marginalized groups, and one common example, sort of experience of all these groups, particularly women, if we see 100 years of time it has taken for women to just, for our South Asian community to believe that women are humans too. And if you see that has not happened just by some women coming forward and talking about their rights, but also the judiciary, the media, the politicians, all standing in support, the artists, the academicians, the common society. And that ecosystem is forming in South Asia, and it is really, really reassuring for us. And I would hope that that builds more and more. And that ecosystem that's built is really one of the hopes for us to go forward in the next few years' time. We have to see these issues, I think, very, very important to see that many of these issues are seen as legal issues, whether decriminalization, same-sex relationships, but more than legal, majority of these issues are socio-political. These issues are mostly also moral and ethical. And we know that the legal battles can be perhaps fought in court, but where do you fight the issues of ethics and values and morals? You have to take them to the society and have to work towards building consensus, even if it takes time, because that's the only way in democracy you can bring about change. I, as an individual, do not feel that we want one strong government to come and bring all favorable legislation for LGBTQ individuals, because it might happen quickly, but that's not democratic enough. The churn in the society and the discussion is important, because such changes are sustainable and organic. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to sort of quickly conclude in the next 30 seconds time. What really are the values and ethics that we are fighting for? It's definitely not so much, I would not trivialize it, and also urge the South Asian LGBTQI community. When we have this opportunity to actually lead the path for humanity, let's not make it all about ourselves, but let's make it about three important values. One, of course, is individual dignity, which is unconditional. Every human being who's born deserves dignity. Second is every individual who's born deserves freedom. And all of us collectively deserve democracy. Those who live in non-democratic setups actually know the value of democracy. It's very, very easy to sort of take democracy for granted, but it's a very, very important value system that's going to guide the path for humanity in the next few years' time. So I think this fight is going to be for upholding these values. I think the journeys that we have to take are three types of journeys in the next, let's say, 10 years' time. We have conservative governments coming in power, there is economic crisis in the region. In South Asia, I think the South Asian countries are more connected with Europe than they are connected with each other. Not just to mention India, Pakistan, which is of course a very famous friendship, but also we can talk about India and Nepal, for example, or India and Sri Lanka. We all are in a dysfunctional relationship with each other. We love each other and also hate each other at the same time. There is a lot of interdependence, but there is at the same time denial of dependence on each other. And of course, now India having these dreams of emerging as a superpower in the region, I think the sort of issues are not that easy. The regional cooperation is limited, and it's likely to remain limited in the years to come. In this context, what are the three journeys? One is for the LGBTQIA individuals themselves. The journey is more of journey within. We have to reflect, we have to think about not living in a bubble, but look at what's the interconnectedness of LGBTQI issues with the broader issues of democracy and individual dignity, as I said. The second is for community which is not LGBTQI community, is for them to see outside, take the journey outside. There is this world of people who are actually suffering not just for not having sex with person of the same gender, but also for fundamental citizenship rights. You cannot marry, you cannot adopt, you cannot take health treatment, you cannot have free educational experience. I think these issues are extremely important. And the third journey is for us to take collectively forward, which once again is towards upholding the human values. And that's all that we have talked about in the paper, but a lot more into details. We have looked at specific legal provisions and recognition, status of recognition across all these civil sort of rights as well as the legal rights. So I request once again for all of you to take some time, scan the code, see the report. For those who have joined online, this is a great chance to, of course, read the report as well. I think I've seen the signs of clock from everywhere, so thank you so much once again for giving me this time. And I look forward to talking to you once again during the panel discussion. Over to you, Elaya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohan, for giving us such a beautiful insight of South Asia and explaining almost everything. But we have a panel also. Yes, and I would like to invite now Milos Hoden to present the European paper. Please.
I will set my stopwatch so that we are sure that we have time for the discussion and for the questions from the audience, because I think this is the most important. And it's very difficult to be after Rohan, because I know that here in Brussels, speaking to most European audience, I guess you're mostly excited about learning more about South Asia, and rightly so, because this is a very interesting, excited, and very often, something that we don't see from Europe. We don't see from Brussels, and we don't see from many other capitals in Europe. And this is especially, I find this report of yours especially relevant and important, because we can learn so much. So maybe this is just a little explainer that when I was asked by the Delhi office of Friedrich Naumann Foundation to contribute to their project, to their research, first of all, I had a global leader, a non-European reader in mind, to also explain a bit what's happening in Europe for those who does not know Europe that much. And also sharing with you, and you can definitely see it in the paper, that when I was asked to write about LGBTQI rights in Europe, my first question was, in Europe, what does this even mean? Like, does it mean in the European Union? And if we decide, okay, yes, this means in the European Union, the next question is, what does that even mean? Because we can talk about LGBTQ rights seen from Brussels, from the European bubble, by the European institutions, and then, of course, we can comment on the fundamentals that the European Union is built on discrimination, on equality. We can talk about treaties, and of course I do it in the paper. We can talk about directives. And also, I mentioned like more than 10 of them in the paper to show how important LGBTQI rights are for the European institutions, and to show all the process that led to where we are right now, where the situation is not perfect, but seen from afar, Europe looks like a pretty good place. And but there is more than that, right? If we look at European institutions, if we look at Brussels, then we should also comment on the European Parliament, which looks even more progressive, looks even more forward-looking if it comes to the LGBTQI rights, and has a history of promoting these rights and talking about these rights not only within the community but also globally. I think since 1984, I think this is the first time when there was a resolution of the European Parliament talking about LGBTQI rights. So the situation looks pretty good if we talk about the rights from the European perspective, having in mind that Europe means the European bubble. But then even the European Union is not only Brussels, it's not only bubble, it's actually 27 member states, and if you look at those, the situation in these countries is very, very different, and actually through the years we see that the difference, the gap between the states is getting deeper and deeper. So countries in the east, but also in the south of the continent, are not progressing that much, and countries in the west and in the north are progressing faster, and this is more and more visible. These directives I mentioned before are not being implemented fast or well enough in some of the places, and we have not perfect, but we have a good indicator. We have the ILGA Europe Rainbow map that shows how different countries produce, not implement, but produce laws, and which laws have been adopted in different countries. And here you see that the differences are huge between different corners of Europe. And I'm from Poland, so a country that for 3 years has been on the very bottom of this ranking. I think with 13 or 15% of scoring 13 or 15% of all the points there. Vis-a-vis Malta, that is the first country, I think, followed by Denmark and Belgium. And these countries, to become green on this map, you need to get more than 50%, and they are definitely deep green. So the situation, even in the European Union, in different countries, is very, very different. But then I think it's very important to stress that Europe is not only the European Union. Europe is much more than the European Union. So there are countries like Norway, Iceland, and the UK on the one hand side, but also we have countries in the Western Balkans that are implementing many laws on the paper very quickly because of the European Union accession, because Brussels is after some failures of Central Eastern Europe, so including Poland, who after joining the EU actually they disregarded the LGBTQI rights. Now the European Commission is looking much stricter at the countries of Western Balkans, and this is why the score in the rainbow ranking of the ILGA Europe of Montenegro is now on the level of the Netherlands, for example. But also Europe are countries like Russia or Azerbaijan, which are using basically state-inspired state-inspired propaganda and state-inspired homophobia as part of their ideology. So this is all Europe, and this is so difficult to say, what is actually the level of rights in Europe, because we have 40 or 50 countries, and they are all very different, and it's very difficult to show it country by country. Of course, there are reports that are doing that. So what I did in this short report, I wanted to show the trends that I find particularly important, and from the perspective of last year's. And let me check the time. And so I talk about 4 trends, and I will just name them quickly. And one of these trends is this, I would say, a meta trend. The trend that influences all other trends, which is the rise of right-wing populism, that influences life of so many LGBTQI people all over Europe. And again, I can stress, I'm from Poland, that for many years I was invited to many conferences like that, many times in Brussels, to say how bad the situation in Poland is. And of course we have our friends from Hungary, again, 2 countries, Poland and Hungary, where both the state apparatus was used to promote homophobia, was happily using homophobia and transphobia and all the phobias to divide the society, because this is what right-wing populists do, right? They love polarization, they dislike including minorities in their agendas, unless including minorities means picking on minorities to fight against them and to use them in their political campaigns. And this is something that was happening in Poland and in Hungary for many years, with the full engagement of the entire state apparatus of the state-owned media. But this is not only these two Central European countries. There is many more countries that are doing, maybe not, there is many more parties or leaders or politicians who are also in the government, or who are trying to be in the government all over Europe, who are using this anti-LGBTQI sentiment to win votes and to be elected and to be in a position of power, to actually use the state apparatus, to actually use their power to make the situation of LGBTQI people better. So this is one of the strengths that I name. The other one, very much connected with it, is the hate speech and hate crimes. And also this is something that we could confirm today during meetings that we had in the morning, for example, with Forbidden Colors, is that they stress that in the context of Europe, the number of the hate speech is rising very quickly, and also the number of hate crimes. And according to many estimations, around 80% of hate crime cases are not reported at all. And this is becoming a big issue in many countries. In many countries, even if it is reported, the state authorities decide not to report on that, not to communicate it well, because they don't see it as a problem. This was again the case in Poland. As soon as the right-wing populists came to power, they stopped reporting on hate crimes and hate speech cases, because they said this is not relevant, so we don't even want to talk about it. So in official statistics, we have like only a dozen of cases of hate speech or hate crimes per year, which we knew it was not true, because the numbers were much higher before they came to power. So hate crime and hate speech. The next trend I wanted to mention, and I mentioned in this report, is the situation of trans people. And again, this is something that was mentioned by many of our collocutors today, and it's connected with both previous trends, so populism and hate speech. Populists, they often use the examples and they attack the most vulnerable groups. And in the context of Europe, but not only, trans people are the most vulnerable groups, and they are groups that are being attacked by politicians, but also by many other conservative groups. But also the issue is that many laws anti-trans people are being implemented, but also many laws that are necessary and needed are not being implemented. So this is difficult or impossible to proceed with transition in some of the countries. In many countries, you can see backlash, and then again, you can look at Hungary, where it's basically impossible right now. Or in many cases, there is no will to change these rules. And again, in Poland, the Polish president, was his first veto ever, was actually, he vetoed the law to make the transition laws easier. Still difficult, but easier for trans people. And right now, still in Poland, to be able to proceed with transition legally, you have to sue your parents in the court, which is emotionally devastating for many individuals. And actually the situation in many countries is getting worse and worse, and the transition is more difficult. And of course you have to add to that also the general hate that trans people are getting from many members of the political class, media, and just the public opinion. And the last trend I wanted to add was the situation of migrants and refugees, which I found particularly important because of everything that has been happening and is happening in the Mediterranean, but also because I wrote a paper in a very particular moment. It was still the ongoing war in Ukraine, and a number of refugees from Ukraine who were coming, who found place in many European countries was very high. But the situation was of migrants and refugees in Europe was very difficult. And again, looking at the point one, so right-wing populism. For right-wing populists in Europe, migrants and refugees are probably number one enemy, and this is something that unites them all over the continent. They convinced many of European public opinion that we totally lost control over our borders, over the security, and of course many of these people who came are LGBTQI people, and their situation is very difficult because they are discriminated by other refugees, and also they're discriminated very often by state authorities who do not follow the guidelines, for example, of the UN guidelines for border guards produced by the European Court of Justice. So I think it's been more than 10 minutes. Oh yeah, it is. More than 10 minutes. So I think I'd like to stress that again, looking from afar, Europe looks like a very good and safe place. But we have to do so many things. There is nothing that we can take for granted, because in many countries we thought that the situation was actually very good and we only work on really some small details, but this is not true, because populists, right-wing populists, they took advantage of all the loopholes and to cause backlash in LGBTQI rights. So we have to be all united and fight for all the rights, because nothing can be taken for granted. And this is why the European elections this year are so important, because not only we have to advance the rights that we don't have now, but also we have to protect what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Miloš, for explaining your paper. Yes, there is a lot of work need to be done, and for the work we need dialogue, and we taking the time into consideration. I think we should dive in for the panel. So I invite all the panel members to come here. So to start with the panel, I would request you all to briefly introduce yourself. Yes.
Okay, so my name is Miloš Hodun. I'm the president of Projekt Polska Foundation based in Warsaw, and I'm a board member of the European Liberal Forum.
My name is Prerna Siddharawat. Professionally, I'm a lawyer, and I'm the youngest parliamentarian from Sri Lanka. And I presented 2 bills to the parliament. One is a youth quota bill, other one is decriminalizing LGBTQ conduct. So regarding those reforms, I'm here.
Yeah, Michael Koch. I'm a member of the European Parliament. I'm a chair of the German Liberal LGBT organization and responsible for LGBT rights in the board of the Free Democratic Party.
Hello, I'm Ruhan. I work in public policy for the last, let's say, 16-17 years, largely in education, skilling, and financial inclusion. These are the 3 main areas of my work. And of course, individual freedom, individual inclusion is the 4th area of my work. So currently sort of work individually with state governments and central government, as well as the governments in South Asia on advancing financial economic freedom, of course, and individual freedom.
Thank you. Thank you for the introductions. I'll dive in the question directly, and I have a question, and maybe Ruhan and Miloš can answer that. And that was, in what ways do the socio-political discussion on LGBTQ plus rights in Europe and South Asia influence each other?
I think it's a very good question, and because from the European perspective, I don't think this. Yeah, this is something that I said at the beginning, after speaking after Ruhan. I don't think we in Europe actually get very inspired by other continents or other cultures. That we have this feeling often that we are this lighthouse and we give the light, we show the light to others, but we very often not learn from others. This is a big mistake, because there is a lot we can learn from different cultures and different approaches. And again, this is something that you wrote in your paper, right? About very different approaches, very different notions, very different ways of understanding what being queer mean, with very different cultural or even religious backgrounds to that. And I think in Europe we don't see it, we don't know about it very often. I'm also a lawyer, and I teach comparative law, and I focus a lot on other legal cultures, and I see that there is this new trend in Western societies actually to look at other legal cultures, at indigenous legal cultures, to learn from that. And I think this is a way that we can progress by learning from others. So just summing it up, I don't think we do it now, but I think we should do it to learn more from South Asia, because there's a lot to learn.
Well, I think I completely agree with Mirosh. We live in an interconnected world more than ever before. I mean, financially, economically, we are far more interconnected, especially since post-globalization and now the era that we are living in. Europe, in one sense, doesn't even have a choice, because the biggest market is South Asia, so you will have to have deeper connections, and we also have a lot to learn from Europe in terms of legislation. Passing legislation. I think in South Asia we have fallen short of passing any legislation, comprehensive legislation in favor of LGBTQIA individuals, and I think to that extent it's not about learning, but it's also looking at just how the legislative path has gone, because as I said previously, a lot of LGBTQI rights in South Asia right now are on this very thin thread of Supreme Court judgments. And that's neither sustainable, that's not sort of going to last for too long. We will have to somewhere bite the bullet and pass legislation, and for that I think the connection with Europe is extremely important. One, I think there is clearly a rise of course, populism, religiously conservative governments. I think economically conservative governments is not exactly a big threat to LGBTQI rights, but religiously conservative governments, definitely there is that similarity. So within the community, I think there is a lot to learn from how do we sort of tackle these issues, because it's something these governments are also coming with a huge majority and huge sort of voter support. So I think there will be a lot of lessons to sort of also share in this context in the next few years to come. And particularly when it comes to, I think, something around institutionalizing these changes. What I see in Europe a lot is there are institutions, not just policies, but institutions that safeguard the LGBTQI rights on a daily basis. And that institutionalization is something that we can learn. We can replicate some of the institutions in South Asia, and that I think is a big sort of scope for collaboration. Multi-layered collaboration. It can be EU, it can be country to country, it can be European Commission, it could be through foundations such as the Frederick Naumann Foundation, wherever the political parties have opportunities to collaborate, and of course the civil society groups can collaborate. So the collaboration can be multi-layered, but I do feel that there is a huge scope for collaboration in the years to come.
Thank you. I would like the next question from Mr. Dulavate. So you presented the LGBTIQ plus bill in Sri Lankan Parliament. Would you like to tell us more about it? What were the challenges?
Actually, when it comes to Sri Lankan context, like the Buddhism, the Buddhist philosophy is 71% of the population practice. If they follow the Buddhism as a philosophy correctly, it teaches like accept the existence. So you have to tolerate others' behavior. But unfortunately, because of these Victorian laws, which we had from the Penal Code of 365, so we had a different argument on that. So the LGBT conduct is quite. It was really penalized for 2 years imprisonment. So the adultery is legalized, but not the LGBT conduct. You can have any spouse and you can have sex, but not the same sex. So it's like it's irony there. So hopefully, like on that, I thought that as a lawyer who wants to safeguard the human rights aspect, those are human. first of all, those arguments are all, even though nobody falls for women, nobody falls for men without, like, that's their passionate. So those humans, we have to safeguard their rights. So on that, I initiate this bill. There were a lot of challenges, especially when I presented the bill. From my own party, they went to the courts, the Supreme Court. And as a 15 years of legal practitioner, so the first time in the history of my legal practice, I become accused. So anyway, in the so-called trial, fortunately, the Supreme Court held that it's totally ongoing with the Constitution, and we can pass the bill by simple majority. So right now we have finished 2 steps. In Sri Lankan context, it's very difficult to have a private member's bill to be passed. It's a very rigorous procedure. Right now we have passed the first step and the second step. Now we have moved to the 3rd step. So we are looking forward to pass that at the same time that the elections are coming. So mostly, so the opposition and the other parties and the government, everybody wants to have the power next time. So it's a crucial time period. But I have mainly issues in my own government or own party members. But I believe mostly, I keep my finger crossed. I believe that we could have, we can achieve this goal. So hopefully I ask your support as well. And especially when it's come to, like, if your support also, it might be in a wrong manner, that if you people are supporting me, is that it's kind of a pressure from Western, something like that. Yeah. So actually, so we have to be very delicate on having your support as well. Yeah. So anyway, like, the Supreme Court decision is quite significant, and the youngsters from our party, the more dynamic and liberal thinking parliamentarian from our party, my friends, they are supporting me, and hopefully I don't think this won't affect, the election won't affect in our exercise. So hopefully I believe we can pass this bill as when we pass this youth quota bill. We managed to pass the youth quota bill very recently. So as a private member bill, which I presented. And I'm being more optimistic on this. Let's see. These coming 2 months is very crucial. Even though my fellow cabinet members, they are making issues, but the president himself is really promoting my reforms. So I must thank the president as well. So, like, he's a kind of a dreamer, and he wants to change the country. So we are looking forward to change the country. As a tourist-based economy, we have that it kind of a huge impact on our tourism as well. Once we decriminalize the whole thing, I think it affects to our economy as well. So a lot of good things are there. At the same time, challenges are there. In any aspect we can face, we do have to understand there are challenges. So we are not worried about challenges.
Thank you. And thank you for your courage, because we know that how it requires a lot of courage and bravery to take such initiative. I have a question for Mr. Gao. As we know that the European elections are approaching, what can be the expectations from these 2024 EU election for the LGBTIQ community?
Well, I think that these elections will be quite crucial on the general questions of a tolerant and diverse society, because I see how the parliamentary groups, especially of ID, so of the very right wing, but also of the ECR, of the conservative and reformers, behave. and how they act at home. So, for example, if we take the example of Italy, for example, I had a speech in the European Parliament, which I did in Italian to address Giorgia Meloni directly, because what she does is purely strategic to win as much voters as possible by appealing to their discriminatory roots. So Giorgia Meloni was, when she was the youth minister, she was very open for LGBTI issues. But since she is the prime minister, she's very stable in European issues and foreign affairs, and she's not like Hungary that she fraternalizes with Putin. But at home, she's fighting against diversity, and especially this addresses to rainbow families. Not accepting parenthoods that have been recognized before. So she's not challenged in court all the time, but so she's trying to get that way with her coalition, and she criminalizes, and at least this is to be expected that it becomes law. She criminalizes people, regardless if it's same sex or not, who use the surrogacy laws in other European countries and criminalize them at home. So an Italian, for example, who has a surrogacy here in Belgium, which altruistically it's possible, it's also possible in Greece, in Portugal, in Denmark, and several other countries of the European Union, completely legal. Even if he lives here in Belgium, if he goes home, he could be taken into court and penalized. Because they make surrogacy a global crime in Italy. And we see also here in the European Parliament that this is not only, so these attacks on at least certain forms of rainbow families are not only coming from the right, they are also coming from feminist positions. So if you look at the Human Rights Report of the European Parliament, surrogacy as such is considered a human rights violation. And this is something where I stood up and said, no, this is an attack of reproductive rights. And this is a misunderstanding. So you cannot say their body, my body, my choice when it comes to abortion. But if we say that this is the right of the women to choose, it has also be their right if it comes to give life and not only to end a pregnancy. And so we are battling on different fields against a right wing, against certain feminist positions, which we also face in Germany, that the same people who attack, for example, prostitution, so this is a broader battlefield of different positions that's not only right against the center.
Wow. My next question would be for Ruhan. As we know that in South Asia we have the gender identity, and it's an umbrella term. Also, like the Hijra, Khwaja, Sara, they have different gender identities under that. And we know that it's more, there's this spiritual aspect of it, like, you know, if a Hijra says that I'm not a woman, I'm a Hijra. We are very proud of it, that identity, and we don't identify as, for example, woman or cisgender. We say we are this, we are not woman or a man, or we are both. So, would you like to explain a bit more on that, or how can this gender identity advance on its own?
Well, it's a bit complex, and I think without context, people may not be able to so I'll try and keep it very brief and make a pick. So what I pick is definitely there is this very distinct transgender or even just queer identity which is unique to South Asia, and sometimes picking words from English language predominantly which do not do justice to the identity that is South Asian, and we need to have more homegrown language, vocabulary. For the longest time, the only words we had locally were derogatory words for this community, so we need to have more respectful words, and we need to reclaim that for sure. And I think there is definitely a big scope for it. I think when it comes to policy matters, we know that the biggest sort of a line that the opposition currently uses, that these are Western concepts and these are urban elite concepts that are imposed upon South Asia. So in that context, I think it's even more important that the South Asian community and countries individually claim that no, the queer identity of South Asia is indeed homegrown, it's unique, and it is from the region, and it is not some imposition from outside. As you said, even the transgender identity. I mean, like somewhere when it comes to use of pronouns, and of course I see the value and the symbolism and signaling that the pronouns do, but at the same time, it can, in South Asian context, look like trivialization of an issue which is far more fundamental than that, and I think we need to sort of maintain that linguistic sort of autonomy as well and claim that more specifically in the years to come. It will have certainly more policy implications. These issues will become more palatable, particularly those who are not convinced by some of these issues right now. When we claim, it's a hypothesis, but I think it might actually come true when we start claiming this identity as South Asian identity. And when it comes to transgender, the point I left in between is I think it's absolutely true. It's I think the whole battle globally is that no, it should not be called third gender, but it should be called women. If you have transitioned from male to female, it should be called women. The whole fight is about that. But the dignity that we have for third gender in South Asia, especially with Pajasara, for example, or we know the famous Hindu god Shiva, actually has a form called Ardha Nari Nateshwar, which means half woman, half man, god. And there are actually many symbols of this god being half man, half woman, and that being taken as a very, very proud symbol of the third gender identity. So I think for some of these, I think there is definitely a space to claim these. And I do feel that this is not just a cultural symbolism or signaling, but it can actually have big policy implications as well, if it is done right. Having said that, when we insist sometimes on too much indigenous, too much homegrown, we are likely to also side up with too much of nationalist and conservative ideas, so we have to be careful of that when we do that. I think that with that caution, there is definitely a huge space to claim South Asian queer identity, and I do not think in academia, literature, or in policy discourse it is done enough at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Mr. Kumar from the European Commission. It's just a general question who wants to reply. I do agree with your intervention saying that even in Europe we have different legislation, so we have also different rights. I'm Italian. I agree with your intervention saying that, for example, the Prime Minister, there is this sort of formal acceptance, but at the end there is this attack to rainbow families. My question is that, okay, we have different legislation, but we have a strong common tool, which is communication. So how we could ameliorate the communication also towards the next parliament election? For example, you talk about hate speeches, but also we have a general sentence, we can say apparent neutral sentence. For example, in the last days we had the sentence Vatican that gender theory is very, very dangerous, but I didn't see any important reactions from the LGBT community. So the question is how we could ameliorate the communication and react properly and in a good timing towards hate speeches, but also towards apparently neutral phrases, neutral sentences, but could be dangerous and could influence negative public opinion. Thank you.
I think that we are in the middle of a cultural battle. in Europe, maybe also worldwide, at least in the Western world. And if I look into Africa, it's also a cultural battle with some different wordings. Then it's un-African, it comes from the West, and all the things that you've already mentioned. But let's stick to Europe. The cultural battle is especially on two issues. The first is gender, and then the same what you said, man or woman or something in between. Is the word binary or not? I think that the cultural battle, the right wing are extremely, it helped them a lot. That's why I recommend not to, so in German language especially, we have this fight about how to gender correctly. And the more radical this is done from queer communities, left, the more this helps to the right wing. Because the average person thinks, oh, they want to kill our language. And even for me, who's like very conscious on these issues, sometimes this wording is so away from normal German language that I say I cannot, this is just, I come professionally, originally also from the PR business. You cannot speak like that if you want to win people. And the administrations are in the forefront, because also in Germany, but I don't know how it's here in the Commission, but in German ministry they are very much at the forefront. And then we now have the clash back that governments say the administrations are not allowed to use this language. And we as liberals say let people speak how they want, but do not pressure them in one or the other direction. But all these discussions help the right wing. And the second cultural battle is trans rights. This is completely connected to this gender debate. And that, so for example, in Germany, the German government has made one major mistake, discussing about details of this transgender law over 1 year. And we see that all the explanations you do, also in the parliament, for people who are critical to that, all these discussions, all these changes, all these explanations do not lead to anything. Because after the discussion, after the changes, it's still the same people that are opposed and the same people that are in favor. So my recommendation for all policymakers in Europe is do a trans law, do it reasonable, but do it fast. Because otherwise the right wings will win. And there's also a recommendation to the trans community in Europe. If the reaction to a 90% law is you are our enemy, then politicians will not go into this fight. So we make the experience that if you do not 100% fulfill the requirements the trans community and the associations say, then you're as right-wing as the real right-wings, because you're still discriminating. But if we see political processes, they are always part of compromises. And if we do not see that, and if we do not reward politicians who go that way against the extreme right and against the conservatives, then nobody will do it. Because when in the end, I'm under fire from all sides, then politically, this was not a good law for me. Or just for election reasons.
Actually, as a politician, you were burning on it's a cultural battle. I don't know whether it's a cultural or power dynamics. Battle is battle. So I believe it's more from South Asian politician. I believe there is power dynamics as well. So what I am suggesting, what happened to Poland, what happened to Hungary, what happened to the South Africa. So as all activists in this room, you must like do a great study what happened, what went wrong. Otherwise, these power dynamics will spread all over the world. So there is a huge threat of losing human rights.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to emphasize, because this might lead to like one-party system, undemocratic, fascist system. So this is where we have to study, like focus on. So I would like to urge from the people who like, I as a politician, I do only like, I do reforms, but there is a huge threat coming on, like, you know, the threat which I had the opportunity I must thank the Dr. Kastai, the Frederick Newman Foundation, that I had the opportunity for last 2 days, like having these rights and everything, that I saw the huge threat is coming on, like, you know. I believe, I'm sorry, I believe this is power dynamics. So we have to think twice, thrice, or again and again. This world is going to like having a like what we valued the human rights, what we valued the democracy, we are going away from that. So I would like to make this opportunity to ensure the danger we have, so to understand the danger we are about to face. Thank you.
If I might think Just very quickly, from the Polish perspective, we have 8 years of that. We said, somebody said something about gender and nobody reacted. Like in Poland, we reacted for 8 years. Like literally every week, somebody was saying something hateful about gender, about LGBTQI people, and it was hate speech. It was like really, dehumanization of people from the mouth of the president of the republic, from the government, or from their closest allies, the church, or the leaders of the church. And we reacted. And just very briefly, lessons learned, I think first of all, we cannot be afraid to use our language. I mean, we need to take over the language. We saw it in the discussion about LGBTQI rights, we saw it in the discussion about abortion. We cannot let the other side dominate, the language, and to make us use their language. We have to be strong and know that we are talking, about human rights, and we cannot make them push us to the corner where we will be just framed by their narratives. This is one thing. The other thing is we have to use really human stories and human examples to show that behind all these concepts, all these acronyms, there are people and their rights. And I think this is something that works. In Poland, people who are hateful against LGBTQI have absolutely, not all of them, but the vast majority have no idea what LGBTQI means. Or the gender, how they say, gender ideology. They say we hate gender ideology, but you ask them, what does that mean? And people don't know. And again, don't get me wrong, also our liberal bubble, there are many people who would say, I'm in favor of gender. It's but they also don't know what it means. So I think this is just very crucial that we have our own language to be able to name these trends that we're discussing about, and to show what it really means for real people. That we are talking about families, we are talking about the future of children, we are talking about recognition of people who are crossing border and going on a train from Berlin to Warsaw and from Berlin to the border, to the Oder River. They are a married couple, and then they cross the border and they are just basically two people who are not connected to one another. And this has huge consequences for their lives, for lives of their children, and so on and so forth. And I think this is something that works, that we can actually communicate better, but we have to do it smart. We have to be smart doing it, and we have to learn from one another. I think this is something that you said, that you feel that there is threat coming from many directions, and we have to also see what other countries are doing within the European context. The bad guys, they're learning from one another, they're copying each other's strategies. We have to do the same. We have to copy good examples, good strategies, and be able to fight with this positive.
I just wanted to shift a little bit again on the question of the European Union and how to communicate with other regions of the world, because it's also part of the communication discussion. And I very interestingly, when I saw the summary of your report, that obviously it happens, maybe in other words, the same like it happens in Africa, that although the laws are colonial, they are perceived to be Indian, African, or whatever, and now this liberalization comes from the West, so this is something colonial, post-colonial in a way, and this is a bit of a paradox. Where we are always confronted with is the question: how much shall we intervene as like the European Union asking for changes, etc.? Is that appropriate or is it counterproductive? And I think in the end we probably can only decide that case by case, because it depends a little bit on the situation. For example, sanctions because of criminalization have been successful, for example in the case of Malawi, because Malawi economy was dependent on the aid by Germany, France, UK, US, but it was completely unsuccessful in the case of Uganda. And so I think we have, the first is that we support the powers inside the other world regions that are progressing and want to progress. And that, of course, is something foundations can do, but also the European Union has to do that. And the other thing is, when do we really raise our voice and say that this is something that's so severe that we cannot accept it? And what's interesting is that we are not doing that on Qatar, not doing on Saudi Arabia, on all those where we have clear interest. And we also do not do it on Uganda, which is the #1 country in Africa with refugees, in brackets, the European Union hoping that they're not coming here. And so I understand why this is done, but it's not openly spoken out. So as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I can absolutely understand when we have a strategy containing China's influence in Africa, that we have a strategy that we want to keep refugees in the region, but then we have to openly say, okay, we have a human rights violation that would ask for sanctions, but we also have interest, and then we should speak it out. And the usual thing that happens in the European Union and also in ALDE party, for example, I experienced on the Congress, I was so set up about that they are talking about, oh, we do not want to hamper the poor people on the ground in Uganda. And 90% of Ugandans are in favor of the death penalty. So why shouldn't they be punished? Yeah, but we should be more open on that, because this is also a better communication to our LGBT community, who asks, why do we not react?
Thank you so much. I think we are over time, and I thank you a lot for joining this panel, and I think dialogues are very important. But also, as Honorable Julavati said, that we need to learn what things went wrong and where. That's also very important, and I thank you all for joining, and I think that would be all. Thank you.